The first is one of my favorites, the Ag Hall of Fame Pioneer Award. Year after year, I'm amazed by the sacrifice and hard work and risk-taking of these early leaders in our ag industry. This category honors individuals who've had a significant influence on the development of agriculture and who have unselfishly served their communities. This award is sponsored by Wheatland Bank. Please help me welcome Ron Perkins as he inducts Harold Cox into the Ag Hall of Fame with the Pioneer Award.
Hello. Take this. Thank you for attending this event to recognize Harold Cox and to participate in his induction in the Ag Hall of Fame as a pioneer under the Pioneer category. It is important for us to recognize those who serve us, especially those who serve us in leadership capacities. I believe Harold was a pioneer in the development of the cattle industry and in the farming industry in the Yakima Valley and in the Columbia Basin. I would like to thank Steve Lancaster as representative of Wheatland Bank for sponsoring the 23 Pioneer Award, and thanks to Colin Hastings and the staff from the Pasco Chamber for putting on the event. Also thanks the Ag Committee for their work and effort they put into it. Many of Harold Cox's family members are here, and maybe you'll get a chance to meet them. It is an honor for me to nominate Harold Cox for this award. The background for my nomination is information I gained from working as the accountant for Harold Cox and his companies from 2012 to 2021. I really only somewhat knew Harold before that. I read articles in the paper about him, and there were many of them. Also, he would occasionally stop by the coffee with the coffee group at McDonald's on Court Street, and well, he would help us with, our job there. That was to save the world, So he could help that way. I became interested in his involvement in the community after learning he left a sizable bequest to the Washington Ag Forestry Leadership Foundation. I had heard about the foundation from several people over the years, some people who participated in their program. And the goal of the organization was to develop leaders for agriculture and forestry. In my mind, it was a question of why he made the bequest, and I didn't know that. But after the bequest was paid, I had several conversations with Sherry, that's his daughter, and she explained to me some of the things that Harold had done in the earlier years and some of the services that he had done. And I asked Sherry if the family had received public recognition for his work, and she said that they had gotten a really nice reply or response to the bequest, but really in the terms of his community service, he hadn't really been recognized. So we talked some more, and eventually I called Colin and asked him if he could send us a packet so they could look at it and ask him if they want to do that, nominate him. And they did, so we did. Great. Anyway, we much of his service was in the years 70s, 80s, 90s. And so in order to get more information about what he did, I researched the archives of the Tri-City Herald newspaper articles extending back to all the way to the 60s. What I find was nothing less than amazing. 39 articles, either featuring Harold Cox or a mention in him. Many articles announced the leadership positions he was appointed to in community organizations. There were several articles about what was going on, what Harold reported was going on in the cattle industry. And it seemed like Harold became the information pipeline for the Tri-City Herald for newspaper articles they wanted to write about the cattle industry. And they did right. Harold Cox said this about cattle prices going up and down, and he said this about projected cattle supplies. These are all articles about the mad cow disease, and on, several articles. Harold grew up in Outlook, Washington. His family raised potatoes, rutabagas, turnips, sugar beets, hay, and livestock. And when he was around 15, the parents moved the farm to a 200-acre farm in the middle of the Yakima River. Think about it, the logistics. It would be a challenging thing. During those years, Harold learned a lot he needed to know about farming and raising cattle. He left high school early to help his dad when his dad got cancer. Later, he was drafted in the Army and he was sent to Korea. He spent just a short time there, and he was honorably discharged to go back and work at home on the farm. He got married in July of 1949, and he and his wife Bonnie moved to a farm in the Granger-Prosser area where they farmed on the Rosa Project. Sandra and Sandy, the two children, were born in 50 and 51. After that, Harold and Bonnie moved to a farm in Moses Lake for a short time. In 56, they purchased a farm in Patterson. It was there that Harold began his public service. He joined as a member of the Patterson School Board for several years before he became the school board chairman. In 63, Harold and Bonnie purchased a farm near Mesa, Washington. In 79, they sold that farm and they bought another farm north of Pasco. Throughout those years, Harold contributed in many ways to the development of the egg industry, and in particular, the cattle industry. He gave generously of his time, energy, and resources to the community. Part of the service led to improvements in wise stewardship of natural resources and improvements to livestock husbandry processes. He lived his entire life in the Yakima and Columbia Basin, Yakima Valley and the Columbia Basin area where he served. And he raised a lot of cattle during that time. Harold recognized the value of education. Even though he had to pause his own high school education, he never stopped learning. He worked to improve his knowledge and always supported education, particularly in agriculture. He learned a lot through his travels overseas. Many times the travel was as a representative of the National Cattlemen's Association. Harold was the organizer and the board member of the Washington Agricultural Forestry Foundation, Education Foundation. He was particularly passionate about providing opportunities to education and career options for young people. Therefore, when he died, he left a sizable bequest to that organization for the purpose of establishing an endowment for scholarships to help young people pursue careers in agriculture and forestry. Harold served for many years on the Washington State Cattlemen's Association Board. This including holding several offices, including leading as president. Also, he served for several years on the board of the Washington Cattlemen Feeders Association, which also included holding several offices as well as president, leading. Harold served as a member of the board of directors of the National Cattlemen's Association. In '91, he was appointed by the Secretary of Agriculture to represent cattle producers nationwide as a member of the National Cattlemen's Beef Promotion and Research Board. The board allocates the national dues paid by cattlemen for marketing and research programs designed to improve the industry. There he served on the Nutrition Research Committee. Harold served on the Franklin County Planning Commission for several years. He was awarded Citizen of the Month for October '73 by the Tri-Cities Visitor and Convention Bureau for his efforts to bring Cattlemen Association 1973 convention of 500 delegates to the Tri-Cities. He headed up a group of cattlemen who overcame bids from Spokane, Yakima, and Ellensburg. He ran for state representative 16th District, Position 2 in 1986. He was a board member and a member of the executive committee of the Washington Agriculture Council. He was a member of the Washington Association of Wheat Growers. He served as a charter member of the Benton County Farm Bureau. He was a member of the former Tri-City Board of Education, and he served on a committee which helped establish the Tri-City Cancer Center. Harold Cox was a true pioneer in the Yakima Valley and here in the Columbia Basin. His influence is still being reflected today in many ways. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Dad's favorite part about his profession was he liked the outside. He liked cattle. He did everything, but when it got down to it, he liked his horse, his cattle. I helped Dad on the farm. I did everything.
I showed up when I was 16 years old in January 1965. I helped Harold with the cattle, and we did some farming together, and I think he got started in the industry because he had to, because his father got sick and he was a senior in high school and he had to keep the farm running. He always leaned on me a little bit to help him get things done. Some advice I think Harold would give: find somebody to mentor you, somebody to help you get started. It gets pretty trying sometimes in agriculture, but if you stick with it and have a plan, and it'll work.
I started out as his accountant in about 2012. When he passed away and we did his estate, we worked on his estate, we found out he gave a sizable donation to the Ag Forestry Foundation, and that made me curious as to what caused him to do that. And so we did some research, and we found that he was the president of the Washington Cattlemen's Association and the Washington Cattle Feeders Association. He served on community boards, he served on school boards. Those are the kind of things that he did.
The legacy that Harold left was to be part of your community, and he always wanted to help anybody, young people, get started in the industry. and family was really important to him. Just learn at every corner what you can learn about the industry, whether it's in farming or cattle or whatever you decide to do it good.
Here to present the Pioneer Award is Bill Shibley with Wheatland Bank, and accepting the award for Harold is his daughter, Sherry Barrett, and son-in-law, Ron Worsham.
Hello, I'm honored to represent Wheatland Bank here at the Pasco Ag Hall of Fame, awarding the Pioneer Award. Harold and I go quite a ways back. I came in '94, and I think I started financing Harold in about '95. And I'm not sure it was an easy relationship for a young banker coming in, and Harold, I pretty quickly was about ready to kick him out of the office. We kept negotiating, and finally it was, damn it, Harold, that's all I can do. Had a great 20-year relationship after that. Really couldn't have been much better. Anyway, Wheatland Bank is honored to award this Pioneer Award to probably Bonnie and Harold, because Bonnie was as big a part of this, of the whole deal as Harold was. Wheatland Bank is the largest ag bank with roots here in eastern Washington, and honored to be here.
On behalf of our family, I'd like to thank the Pasco Chamber of Commerce and the Ag Hall of Fame Committee for honoring my dad with the Pioneer Award. He would be so pleased to know his efforts and activities in the community were noticed and appreciated. So thank you. While all of us in the family have many memories of living and working with my dad, I want to touch on the personal philosophies that drove both of my parents to the successes they shared in life and the contributions that they made to the community. It's very hard for me to think about my dad without thinking about my mother, Bonnie. They were very tied together. And a lot of his philosophy and principles were reinforced or even driven by my mom. This became very evident after she passed away. They were the ultimate team. My dad had a strong work ethic which he passed on to his family. Despite not finishing high school, losing an eye in early life, having polio, having a bout with spinal meningitis, and getting a broken vertebrae in his neck, he overcame and had a get-the-job-done attitude toward everything he did. He was a risk taker, and my mom was significant to the extent that she limited the level of risk they took on. Having said that, his willingness to take risk was very much an element that drove many of his decisions, both good and bad. My parents were very much self-made, and they became successful through their own hard work, self-motivation, and self-reliance. My dad lived by the code of the West, and those principles were very much a part of his personal fabric, such as live each day with courage, take pride in your work, always finish what you start, do what has to be done, be tough but fair. When you make a promise, keep it. Ride for the brand. Talk less and say more. Remember that some things aren't for sale, and know where to draw the line. His word was his bond, and if he shook your hand on a deal, you could depend on him to live up to what he'd agreed to. He had very good integrity in this respect. Dad was always ready to provide a hand up to those who needed it, and he had no prejudice towards anyone who was looking to improve their situation, as long as they were willing to work hard and do their part. He detested giving folks a handout and was critical of what he called government giveaway programs. Dad was all about self-reliance, pulling oneself up by the bootstraps, and hated anything that put people in the position of becoming dependent on the government for their survival. He was a staunch conservative and supported Republican political positions and candidates. Dad was very competitive, no matter what the stakes were, and he could be a formidable adversary. He loved to win, even if it was at the pool table with his sons-in-laws. Relationships were important to him, and he seemed to know everyone, and everyone seemed to know him. Part of this was because of the fact that while he traveled the world, he never lived very far from his birthplace in Outlook, Washington. The move from Patterson and Mesa in 1963, when the John Day Dam was going to flood our farm, was a big change for all of us. We moved everything, including the house, to Mesa. My 12-year-old self cried because I had lost my privacy by moving to the city. Yeah, Mesa. And we didn't even live in the city. That was when the change from predominantly farming to cattle occurred. We went to the one and only vacation we ever took, since having cattle is a 24/7, 365 days per year job. While still farming, Dad also raised cows and calves in feedlots and ran cattle on several ranges. When we became old enough, my sister and I were his crew and spent many hours and days on horseback herding cattle and doing just whatever he needed done. It was a great growing up experience. At times, Dad had cattle scattered around Washington and Oregon. Dad and Mom purchased the Lenz farm on Highway 395 north of Pasco in 1978. They built potato storages there to support the farming operation. After retiring, they rented the farm to Ron and Sandra, my brother-in-law and sister. In 2005, the farm was put into the family LLC that still owns the land. Ron and Harold Worsham continue to farm it. In closing, I particularly want to thank Ron and Georgia Perkins for all of their research and work to put this nomination together. Without their efforts, none of this would have happened. Thank you, Ron and Georgia.
I have a little statement to make that the Pioneer Award, my folks come here when the basin was broke out. And the Pioneer Award is the women just as much as the men. There was nothing here. They lived in shacks and tents and everything else to break out the basin. Sand blew, they'd crawl out the window to open the door. So I think Bonnie deserves as much. But anyway, Harold was my father-in-law, and we made 1,000,000 miles together. Some of them good, some of them bad. But we traveled all over. We had cattle feeding in Canada and cattle feeding here. And I just got a couple little stories. One day, Harold was relatively well known around the Tri-Cities by the State Patrol. He had a rather heavy foot. So him and I were going up the valley one day to the feedlot up there, had cattle up there, and I was driving. Anyway, we get pulled over. And he's sitting over there jabbing me about me getting pulled over. And that was about the time the seatbelt law come into effect. And I had mine on. And State Patrol, Trunky, come up to the door. We knew the State Patrol well. Anyway, the State Patrol come up the door. He tapped on my window and rolled it down, and he says, you know, your passenger's supposed to have his seatbelt on. And he started chewing on me. And I says, whoa, sir. I says, have you ever tried to teach an old dog new tricks? And he looked at me and kind of grinned, and he walked around the other side of the car, and he tapped on Harold's window till he rolled it down, and then he proceeded to tell him how to put his seatbelt on, and he took both our license. Goes back to the car, and when he come up to the car, he gave me my license, and he gave me Harold's with a ticket. I didn't get a ticket. Anyway, we traveled a lot of miles through Oregon, and running cows and doing all kinds of things. But it started out 1965 this month. There was this little redheaded girl that I kind of wanted to get to know. And I showed up down there on my motorcycle in the middle of winter, and Bonnie had a large round table in her kitchen, and everything happened at that table. I mean, selling cattle, buying cattle, whatever went on in that place, even at Pasco, that large round table. And so I showed up there with a friend of mine, and I was going to check this little gal out. I never met her or Harold that day, but I had a long visit with Bonnie. And we had homemade pie and ice cream and all kinds of things. And so I must have passed the test, because it was about 2 weeks later, I was going there in my car, and Lucille Bailey, the neighbor to the south, called Bonnie and says, "Do not let either one of your daughters go out with that wild kid." But Bonnie was as much a part of the deal as Harold, and that's the way the whole basin was developed that way, with the men and the women, because the men didn't do it by themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations. Well deserved.